Criminal and Civil Procedures Module. There are 9 lessons with their corresponding desired objectives to be achieved by participants within this module. At the end of these short lessons, participants should be familiar with the basic factual information applicable to criminal and civil procedures in the United States as well as the state of Ohio. Of course, we have to have a disclaimer, right? All the information provided in these short lessons is publicly available and provides a simplified view of criminal and civil procedures in the state of Ohio for participants to gain a basic understanding. Remember, procedures vary across jurisdictions, so it is important to always check the steps in the process in the jurisdiction you are working. This information is not intended to be construed as legal advice. Participants will also be able to identify key concepts along with their corresponding legal terminology and know how to use them appropriately. Participants will also be provided resources to complete the individual assignments and are encouraged to use the same to build personal glossaries by incorporating the legal terminology used in these lessons so they can interpret them correctly and use them appropriately into their working languages. Lesson 4. Criminal Case Flowchart. The objective here is to gain a basic understanding of how the criminal case process works in the Ohio judicial system. As you can see in this chart of the sequence of events in the criminal justice system from the Bureau of Office Statistics, BJS, there are many steps that occur from the time a crime is committed to when a defendant is serving the sentence for said crime. Here is another example of how a flowchart of the criminal process would look like. Again, it is a very busy diagram, so we will break it out instead. The Ohio Rules of Criminal Procedure outline all the steps in the criminal process. Even as we recognize that every criminal case process has its own series of steps, depending on whether it is at the state or at the national level, in this lesson, we are going to get a general and simplified idea of the way a case moves through the courts in Ohio. There may be instances where some of the steps do not apply or may seem to be out of order, but they are mentioned in this lesson nonetheless. For specific details about the order of the steps, it would be necessary to consult an attorney with the particulars of the actual case involved. Often, the first step is the report of a crime or there is an initial contact of a suspected offender. Next, there is usually a criminal investigation, also known as the process of discovering, collecting, preparing, identifying, and presenting evidence to prove the truth of what happened and who is responsible. The purpose driving the investigation is to determine whether a crime has been committed so the police can legally obtain sufficient information and evidence to identify the responsible person so that that person, also known as the suspect, can be located and legally arrested. Finally, the criminal investigation is used to present the best possible case to the prosecutor for presentment of formal charging in court. A complaint is the official charging document. This document will inform the accused or suspect that a charge has been made and that official proceedings are now going to take place. Remember, in Ohio, the Court of Common Pleas is where cases involving any felony allegation are litigated, and the municipal courthouse is where misdemeanors are litigated. So depending on the nature of the complaint, that is where it is filed. Depending on the nature of the complaint, as well as the findings of the criminal investigation, the court process begins when a police officer arrests the person believed to be responsible for the offense or serves that individual with a complaint or summons containing a brief description of the offenses charged and the type of charge. Is it a felony or a misdemeanor? If it is a summons and the person responsible is not immediately arrested, the summons will also provide information of the date and time to appear in court for the initial appearance. By the way, if the individual being summoned is not in court for the initial appearance, an arrest warrant may be issued. In Ohio, defendants can have an initial appearance, which can lead to a determination of whether or not a preliminary hearing is necessary. For specific details, please consult Rule 5 of the Ohio Rules for Criminal Procedure. For this lesson's purposes, the initial appearance is where the person believed to be the one responsible, or the accused, has the right to appear before a municipal court judge or magistrate without unreasonable delay, which often means that these initial appearances are scheduled within 72 hours. If the case deals with felony allegations, this is where the accused is informed of the allegations and a determination is made about setting bond. At this time, if the accused cannot make bond, he or she has the right to a preliminary hearing. Please note, it is important to understand what the Ohio Rules of Criminal Procedure have to say about when a defendant gets to plead. In felony cases, the defendant shall not be called upon to plead either at the initial appearance or at a preliminary hearing, according to the Ohio Criminal Rule 5A5. In misdemeanor cases, the defendant may be called upon to plead at the initial appearance. Where the defendant enters a plea, the procedure established by Criminal Rule 10 and Criminal Rule 11 applies, according to the Ohio Criminal Rule 5A5. A preliminary hearing will be held to determine whether there is probable cause to proceed with the complaint and whether there is probable cause to hold the accused in custody or under bond. This public hearing is meant for informational purposes and shares many similarities with a criminal trial. Please remember that it is during a preliminary hearing where a judge determines if there is probable cause to proceed with the case. The case would get bound over to the Court of Common Pleas and presented to a grand jury unless the county prosecutor started the case by presenting it to the grand jury first. Either way, it is when the indictment gets issued that the proceedings move toward arraignment. The C&O Legal Glossary describes the arraignment as a court proceeding in which a criminal defendant is told of the charges against him or her and is asked to enter a plea. Here is where the defendant also gets told his or her constitutional rights. If the defendant already has an attorney, this could be the time for negotiating a plea with the prosecution. According to the C&O Legal Glossary, plea agreement, plea bargain is a negotiation between a prosecutor and a criminal defendant in which the defendant pleads guilty or no contest to a criminal charge without a trial taking place. The prosecutor may offer a concession to encourage a plea agreement. When a defendant pleads guilty or no contest to the charges, the process is almost over. Usually, the final two steps are for a pre-sentence investigation to occur to determine what the sentence needs to be. The defendant would then serve the determined sentence. When a defendant pleads not guilty to the charges, the process continues. The steps continue with a pre-trial hearing, then a trial. The outcomes of a trial or the adjudication of the trial can lead to either acquittal, meaning the person is found not guilty, or a conviction, meaning the person is found guilty. If the defendant is found guilty, then a pre-sentencing investigation will be conducted to determine the sentencing parameters. The C&O Legal Glossary indicates an appeal as a request made by the party that has lost on one or more issues for a higher court to review the decision for correctness. Appeals have a very strict process and are best left to be explained by an attorney. Depending on the sentencing terms and criteria, the terms of release can include probation, parole, or some other type of oversight. The convicted individual will have to abide by the requirements or risk a violation that will lead to additional punishment or fines. In Lesson 4, the key points to remember are: determinations of jurisdiction and venue depend on severity of offense. There are several steps in any criminal process. This process changes depending on the plea offered. Individual activity. Complete the exercise. by identifying the general steps in the criminal process flowchart in the state of Ohio and provide a basic definition of each. End of Lesson 4.